Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome to Regarding the Work of Resistance. My name is Miriam Ruiz, and I'm the School and Community Programs Manager here at CAM, and I am coming to you live from the Contemporary Art Museum's boardroom. And I have the privilege of moderating this inspiring lineup of panelists today. Months ago, when I was first learning about our current exhibition, Stories of Resistance, I, as many of you who have already visited the exhibition, was overwhelmed by the various historically fraught contexts that the artists were addressing, investigating, and contending with in the US and around the world. We have Kurdish freedom fighters, iconic vilified Olympians, the looted homesteads of displaced Palestinian families, and reenactments of overlooked enslaved people's uprisings in the South. We're both challenged and inspired by these stories, but at the same time, I knew that it would be a grave oversight for us to fail to center the very vital and ongoing work of resistance that is occurring in our very city. Few of us can claim ignorance of the systemic economic and health service disparities that have been a blight on our city since forever. But where state and society have failed, marginalized, and even demonized large portions of our own populace, there have been people who have risen up to serve and advocate for those without a voice at the expense of their own personal time, money, and resources. So today we are spotlighting the work of 3 local activists and the grassroots organizations that they founded. We have Kayla Reed from Action STL, Dr. LJ Punch from the TSTL, and Sharon Morrow from Tent Mission STL. With all 3 of them, you have no doubt what city they're working in. So this is going to be a bit of an informal conversation. I want to give as much time to our speakers to tell us what they do, why they do it, and even how we might help them with their work moving forward. Our speakers will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes. During that time, feel free to type your questions to our speakers using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then in the last 10 minutes or so, we'll give our speakers the chance to answer some of your questions. Furthermore, feel free to use the chat box to respond to anything that resonates with you or to respond to some of the other people using the chat. Now, at this point, I would normally formally introduce our panelists by reading out their many accomplishments and credentials, but I would rather let our panelists introduce themselves and tell us what they think it is important for us to know about their work and what they're doing. So let's start with Sharon. Could you tell us who you are, what you're doing, and what Tent Mission is all about?
Sure. Well, thanks for having us here. I appreciate it. My name is Sharon Morrow. I grew up here. I do street outreach primarily in St. Louis City, sometimes in the county and surrounding areas as well. I work with a grassroots, all volunteer organization where we do direct street outreach and provide emergency supplies to survive to people that live outside on the streets. We were created in early March 11th, in a direct response to the lack of services that St. Louis City provided for the unhoused population during the city shutdown due to the pandemic.
All right, thank you so much. Kayla?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Kayla Reed. I use the she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Action St. Louis. I am a native to St. Louis. I've lived here all my life and found myself in movement work after Mike Brown was killed in 2014 and the Ferguson uprising happened. As a protester, I was politicized around the inequality that is pervasive in our communities and the ways that these different structures interact with each other to create a unique oppression for Black people. That the encounter that we were witness to in August of 2014 was on the backdrop of the context was housing inequality, deep issues within our criminal legal system, our education systems, and so many others. And so my work as an organizer started in December of 2014 when I worked at the Organization for Black Struggle for 2 years, working on issues of civilian oversight, minimum wage, local elections. And then in 2016, we founded Action St. Louis to really answer the question, how do we build a racial justice organization, a Black organization, with the idea that we all must be free, that all Black people need to be in this conversation, Black queer folks, Black trans folks, formerly incarcerated, poor folks, unhoused folks. And that we needed to, the answer to that question of how we challenge the systems that have created our oppression is to build power. And so Action St. Louis was started in 2016, and we have a C4 Action St. Louis Power Project that was started last year. And our work has been in 3 main areas: housing, anti-carceral work, and electoral justice. So we work in electoral justice from voter registration to fighting against the voter suppression laws that are often introduced in our capital, and to do deep political education and voter mobilization on issues that directly impact our lives. Right now, our housing work is centered around preventing people from losing their homes in the midst of this crisis. And it is a crisis that we are experiencing in St. Louis. There are almost 3,000 evictions filed in St. Louis, with the majority of those being Black families, the majority of those being Black women who are single mothers. And they are facing homelessness. And our city didn't have the infrastructure before the pandemic to support those who are housing insecure, and certainly has not built that infrastructure while this problem has worsened in the pandemic. And then our anti-carceral work is to really talk about safety based on the things that actually keep us safe. And those things are not police and jails and prosecution. And so we work to move resources out of the carceral system into our communities, prioritizing the things that actually create ways that our families and our communities are well. And so those campaigns have been Close the Workhouse. We run the Defund, Reimagine, Transform campaign, and have been able to move about close to $20 million out of the local carceral system, prioritizing things like housing, social services, civil rights as the areas that we need to, and violence prevention as the areas that we need to invest into to strengthen our communities and actually keep our families safe. So that's a little bit about Action. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Punch.
Thank you, and it's a privilege to share the space with folks who have been working so hard in St. Louis for so long. I'm a trauma surgeon, and I was a post Ferguson recruit to the healthcare community. You can interpret that however you want to. There's some really positive and some really negative things about that. And I was welcomed into an environment after Michael Brown's murder that was rich in discourse around the issue of race and violence, and particularly the issue of injuries that are created by the path of bullets. And so walking into that environment, joining the community in February of 2016, I was welcomed into a series of discourse and community conversations about the issues of violence. And I thought that my role working at a prominent trauma center in the city would somehow make me relevant to the lives and experiences of people. And what I found was, while there was some recognition of the value of the healthcare system, there was a expression of a total absence of that same resource and aid outside the walls of the hospital. And I answered the call literally, where are you at, by working to bring resource, education, training, and awareness and power beyond the walls of the healthcare institutions, and started by simply training people how to stop the bleed, bringing the national Stop the Bleed campaign, which was really focused on insular episodes of deaths by bullets, and not really focused on the day-to-day experience of people living in violence, and really making it relatable, affordable, relevant. And in doing that, that's all I was doing. I didn't plan to do more than that. In doing that, though, in spending time in community, listening to people, meeting them where they were, bringing resources out. I started developing relationships and getting much more aware of the far bigger impact of trauma with a capital T, not simply issues related to bullets, and the way that they were really, really impacting people's health and well-being. Out of that group of relationships and body of experience, and honestly fueled by the pandemic, grew this organization called the T, which is the symbol of no more trauma, but also the symbol of a tourniquet, the ultimate sort of, you have the power to save your own life. You don't need to wait, and you can't wait for 911 to show up. And so that body of work has now become an entire what we call community of health, which is everything from retired nurses to grassroots organizations to people who simply want to be part of helping people suffer less and recover better from the impact of trauma, whether it's from a bullet or some prior relationship pain, financial impact, the issue of housing instability, the impact of substance use, or the pandemic. So that body of work now lives in a building, and we also have several mobile units. The building is called the T, so our organization is called the T now. And the mobile units are the T on wheels, so we call them Tweels. And we have a group of just incredible folks working to reduce the impact of trauma in the St. Louis region. And I have become now the executive director of that work. I left full-time medical practice in July 2020, recognizing that in the midst of a once-in-a-lifetime global crisis, I could do more to serve the St. Louis community outside of the institution than inside, and that's where the grassroots really caught fire. I continue to practice as a clinician at Christian Hospital, working in the intensive care unit, and I also am the medical director for a subset of the T, which is called the BRIC, the Bullet-Related Injury Clinic, which serves people who are recovering from the impact of being shot after they're discharged from the ER to self-care. So lots of different programs and lots of different people that represent a philosophy that with education and resource, people have all the power they need to heal and be well.
Oh, thank you so much. There's so much there that we can just drill down on. So Dr. Punch, I heard you talking about how the question was, where you at? So I'm wondering if you could kind of break it down for us. Like we think of the medical system as something that's equally accessible to everyone. So, and this is a question I'll actually have for the three of you, is where are those gaps in the system, like as it is meant to be for people, the way that, I don't know, my middle class family growing up probably imagined the way things work. I'm curious if you could share with us, and we'll start with Dr. Punch. Could you tell us like where that gap is and what when people were saying, where are you at, like, where were you? Where was the system?
Well, when you talk about healthcare in St. Louis, there is a physical gap. In that, you have Grand Avenue and Kings Highway, and a whole lot of space in between without a lot of care, in particular, the area immediately north of Del Mar. And so there's an actual lack of clinical spaces. There are a lot of people doing amazing stuff through our network of safety net providers and the federally qualified health centers. But the two major healthcare systems, in particular the one that I was part of, don't have as much of a physical presence in North St. Louis, and particularly in the city. But that ain't it. That ain't the real problem. Because when you think about accessibility, you have the issue of financial barriers to care and the things that people have to do to get in the door to be seen, even if it requires them to disclose and share a lot of really intense information about their financial status just to be evaluated. But also the culture isn't the right word, the vibe, the way it feels to walk into a space expecting to be met with people who are there for you to heal, and instead to be faced with a culture which itself is so unwell and so deeply traumatized, they can't hope to be present for your healing. So when I think about access, it's really not about physically where something is, it's about the financial emotional, psychological, cultural realities of what it is to be available to someone as a healer. And the thing that I have really been getting excited about is the way in which some folks have compared what we do at the T to the movement of the Black Panthers to provide free healthcare in community. And here's why. I don't claim to have the prowess of that generation. I can't stand in that space. Those were freedom fighters in a place that I aspire to. But here's what I have found, that when you take healthcare and you put it in community and you make it free and you make it representative of the community it's serving, you don't simply make it more accessible, you transform the care itself. And that's the part.
I'm waiting for my dinner, Dad.
Okay. Well, it's dinner time too. That's really important. Access to food is really important. But you actually transform not just where it is, but you transform what it is. That you actually provide a different kind of care when you make it accessible. And that's the part that's really got me ignited these days.
That's wonderful. And I want to ask more questions about that, but I do want to give everybody else a chance to talk. Kayla, you mentioned 3 kind of prongs of Action STL that you folks are focusing on. Maybe I'll be a little bit selfish and say what I'm really interested is, could you maybe just break down a little bit about the Close the Workhouse campaign? And you also talked about moving resources from the carceral system to the communities. Why is that necessary? What kind of money are we talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'll kind of answer it in reverse. And I'll be quick because I want Dr. Punch to feed that baby. So our theory of change and the way our campaigns are shaped is kind of a triangle in my head. It's invest, divest, contest. And the reason we use this kind of theory of change is we're divesting from the carceral system to invest in our communities while contesting for power in order to do that. And the reason that is a response to the historical nature of what has happened to Black communities. Because when you look at what has happened to Black communities, our theory of change is a kind of response to that. Because what has been happening is that we've overly invested in the carceral system, and we've suppressed political power while divesting from our communities. So when you look at what is happening in pockets of St. Louis, like North City, North County, some pockets of the South Side, you see the consequence of this long-term divestment and this political suppression. Voter turnout is low, violence is high, education rates are low, how much houses are worth is low, right? Even the sort of life expectancy is lower because of this divestment. And instead of responding to those issues where our children are hungry, our families are being harmed, our schools don't have as much money, our homes aren't worth as much. Instead of investing into the things that actually would directly solve those issues, we've invested into the carceral state. And so in St. Louis, we spend about $5 billion on affordable housing each year, but we spend more than $150 on policing each year. And what we've done each year is kind of increase that. And we've not seen the violence go down at all, which means that what we're investing in is actually not solving the question. And we're not seeing a community that is participating in the decisions that are impacting their lives, right? The lowest voter turnout in the city of St. Louis is happening, is detrimental to creating strong communities, right? And so then what is happening is that our organizations are filling the gap that has been created from that massive divestment. And so our organizing is thinking about that from a theory perspective, but then in real practice, how do we start to think about redirecting that cycle where we're not taking money out of community to put it into broken systems, we're taking money out of broken systems to put them into community, and that our communities are stronger each time we do that. And so Close the Workhouse is a manifestation of that. Since the workhouse was built in St. Louis, it has been a place that has caged poor Black people. We started this campaign in 2017. There were almost 800 people in the workhouse. 95% of them are Black. 90% of them could not afford the bail that had been set, regardless of charge, right? A bail had been set and they just simply could not afford it, which means that a person who lived in Clayton, charged of the exact same crime, didn't have to sit inside of an inhumane facility on average for 350 days because they could afford to pay the bail amount that was set for them. So we were already divesting from a community. Something happens, a person is thrown in a cage, and then they're further punished for being poor, right? And if we're thinking holistically, what is happening to the family? What is happening to the community with this person extracted and held because they don't have resources, right? And so the idea behind Close the Workhouse is both an articulation of a local problem that has manifested in most localities. And so we really thought, okay, we're caging people who cannot afford bail. This is, families are suffering, but we're spending $16 million to do that. And I'll bring back up the stat I said earlier. We were only at the time spending about $5 million on affordable housing, but we were spending $16 million to hold people in one jail who just couldn't afford bail. That's it. So what could we have done with that $16 million? We could have paid folks bail and sent them back home, sent them back into the workforce, allowed them to support their legal process, to support their families. Because what's happening is if you take one income out the house and you cage it, well, now there are children and other parents who are suffering, trying to figure out how to survive. And folks are making the decision. We bailed out folks whose loved ones have made the decision. I have to pay either I'm going to pay $500 for my rent, I'm going to pay $500 to bail someone out, or I'm going to put my house up to bail someone out. And we're further, we're putting communities that are already vulnerable further at risk through this larger criminalization issue. And so the workhouse really is one symptom of a problem that's not finished, even if that jail is empty. But what we've been able to do is move resources out of it. So the money that we've been able to reallocate has gone to things like increasing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, expanding social services, expanding victim support, right? And these kinds of things that are actually necessary to heal, as Dr. Punch has said, but also build, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of the thinking behind the Close the Workhouse campaign and the work that we've been able to do. And along the way, what we've been able to also do is take communities that are disillusioned with the process, right? They're not getting the resources, their elected officials aren't paying attention to them, and politicize them. And so, you know, right now, one of the leaders of the campaign, when we met her, Inez Bordeaux, was had lost her nursing license because she had been arrested in the workhouse, and is now the manager of community collaborations at Arch City, and is the 9th Ward committee woman as of last week. So the complete political transformation of people is possible when we invest in them and we take the time to stop focusing on solutions that are hindering people's ability to thrive.
Thank you for that thorough answer. And I mean, as you're talking, I'm just thinking it just makes so much sense. So why is the municipal government or the government at large, you know, taking this approach? But that's a whole nother conversation, right? Sharon, similar question. I'm wondering if you can kind of break down a little bit for us some of the systemic failures that you're witnessing when you're out in the streets and working with the unhoused populace. What's broken? What's not working? You know, I think especially when it comes to the unhoused population, there's this idea that the people who are there kind of deserve to be there or just not taking advantage of services. Could you enlighten us as to what you've learned out in the streets?
So, yes, I can. And I'm a little kind of in awe, actually, with Dr. Punch and Kayla. Just I followed their work for quite some time, and really without their work, you know, Tent Mission wouldn't really be where it's at. You know, Punch did a lot of gave us a lot of resources, and same with Action St. Louis. So we're very lucky to have both of those organizations with in St. Louis. I don't know if people really understand how powerful they are. Tent Mission, we are a group of volunteers, and we count on other organizations like Dr. Punch and Kayla's organization to get things done. So some of the injustices or things that we see, that's what you asked for, gaps in services, pretty much. Okay, so really when you go outside on the street, it's pretty, if you're out there all the time, it's pretty easy to see that there is a huge need for walk-in shelters here in St. Louis City. We do not have any, okay? And, I've talked to a lot of other outreachers, and most outreachers are volunteers. They're just people that care about our community and they want to make it better. But we need 24-hour walk-in shelters. Punch, actually, I know it's not a shelter, but they provide a lot of services for medical needs. But there is none. We had Larry Rice's shelter that was free. The city didn't have to pay for any of it. And the city shut it down. And when I say the city, I want to make it really clear that I'm not talking about the current administration. I'm talking about the last 3 administrations. So I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. So we definitely need walk-in shelters. That's definitely a problem. We do not have enough shelter beds. I know that there was a report put out this winter that said we did, but I think that was really lacking. I think that they only focused on the downtown area instead of North City, the West Side, and the South Side. So I don't believe in the people that do street outreach with us that are on the ground several times a week now, about 4 times a week now. During the pandemic, we were out there 7 days a week. But there are people everywhere on the sidewalks, in vacant buildings, in vacant homes, in tents, in parks. So as far as gaps in services, absolutely shelter space is an issue, and walk-in shelter space where there's no barriers. That is a huge problem. There's people really everywhere. Could you help me a little, Mim, on what else you asked? I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. Actually, I do want to follow up on another part I asked about, maybe some of the misconceptions people have about unhoused folks.
Oh.
But when you talk about barriers to walk-in shelters, maybe some of our audience don't exactly know what you mean by that. Could you kind of break that down for us? What are these barriers to these shelters you're talking about?
So, a lot of the people that we work with may have substance abuse, so are intoxicated or had drank it all. They're not allowed in. And that is, oh, my internet's going out. So barriers can be issues with staff, from their previous times in the shelter. There's a ban list in the city, and if people are on the ban list, that's a problem. The safe haven, I don't know if people are familiar, but over the winter, there was a group of folks, many of them were part of Tent Mission and St. Louis Winter Outreach, that they created a safe haven, and there were no barriers. However, because of the property that we were in, there was a ban list and it was very small. And I lost it again, I'm sorry.
All right, no worries. So just because you did go out for just a little bit, to kind of reiterate what you were talking about, is that unhoused folks, if they've been drinking, if they've been doing drugs, I think I've even heard if you're swearing too much,
That's right.
they will not let you have a place to stay at that night. And that's of course an issue, because a lot of some of these people are unhoused because of these illnesses that they have. So it's very discriminatory. Kind of following up on that, and this is a question I'll address to all 3 of you again. What are some misconceptions that people have about the work you do and the people with whom you work. I think I kind of mentioned the fact that, you know, I'll say for myself, I grew up in a house, a rather conservative household, where there was an idea that, you know, nobody needs to be in-house, just get a job. So what are the misconceptions that you hear from folks about the work you do, and that maybe is even perpetuating some of these systemic issues that you are having to step in and fill the gap?
So there are a lot of misconceptions. When people say they just need to get a job, well, you know, I don't understand how people could even think that. I guess if you're living in a home and have a job and a bank account, an internet and a phone and a car, that might seem like an easy task. But if you're living on the street without any of the things that I listed, I don't know how anybody is able to get a job. Most of the people out there do want to work. Other people maybe want to work, but they live in a constant state of trauma because they're in fear of their safety while they're outside on the street. That is a huge problem. Or because they've had trauma from their previous experiences and they haven't been supported and able to work it out. So I don't really see that. I know the people that we work with don't see that the same view. You know, we believe that the people that are outside standing on the concrete or the asphalt, wherever we meet them, they absolutely they want to survive, and they just need support in being connected to people like Punch to move along in their journey, move forward in their journey, whatever their needs may be, whether it be drug support with drug issues or mental health services. And that is a huge problem outside. And I think a lot of that stemmed from the 80s, from the federal and the state level changes for funding how we treat people that have mental illnesses. So we saw back in the 80s, we saw a flood of people coming out that do have some severe mental illnesses without support. And it still happens today. I mean, this morning before I went to my doctor's appointment, you know, I had to go connect with someone that has severe schizophrenia. And they're just not in a place or a space where they're ready to go to a shelter. They don't feel safe in a shelter. There's not enough mental health spaces for homeless people in St. Louis. I mean, really, it would be hard to put her in a regular shelter because of the stimulus that is there. She needs separate space, private space, and St. Louis just doesn't have that, you know.
Absolutely. And, you know, mental health care in this country is maybe not what it needs to be either. And it kind of, what you just said about you know, money and support being just what people need to get back on their feet kind of reminds me of something that Kayla said. So coming back to you, Kayla, I'm wondering if you could just kind of the same thing. What are some common misconceptions, or I know sometimes things can get even more aggressive maybe with some of the opponents of the work you do, but what are the things that people are saying about you, about the work you do, or just some of the things that you hear people say like, oh, that's completely unnecessary, Black Lives Matter, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, over the 7 years that bar has absolutely moved. 7 years ago, folks were terrified to say those three words together, Black Lives Matter. And now, you know, it's been corporatized and it's on every shirt in Target and Walmart. While they seemingly continue to pay their workers in places like St. Louis, where they're majority Black, lower than a minimum wage and don't offer, you know, healthcare benefits. And so yeah, I think there are a few misconceptions. This week we've seen them sort of get loud if you follow our organization on Twitter. One of those is that, you know, we are not vested in the well-being of our community and that we do not care about violence. And in some ways, the way we talk about violence is narrow, right? We talk about interpersonal violence as the only form of violence. When Black people in this country and this city have been victims of structural violence, of state-sanctioned violence, at the hands of police, but at the hands of policymakers who continue to deny resources from coming into our communities and deprioritizing our neighborhoods. And in St. Louis City, we've seen that, where the majority of development happens in a 4-block radius from Arch to Park, right? Or when a house that is in Shaw or Tower Grove is 20 times the value of a house that is in the Ville or Jeff Vanderloo. And those are not happenstance situations, right? That those have been political decisions that have been made over and over again, and they are violent. When you choose to neglect someone, that is a form of violence. And when we don't have an expansive view of how violent society is to some communities, then we tend to have the wrong solution to those problems, right? We don't think about investment as a necessity. We make excuses for the products that we see. And so in St. Louis, I think some of the misconceptions is that we are not concerned about interpersonal violence. And we are so desperately prioritizing this and understanding that we have to come to every angle, but it is a violent reaction to take someone from their family and cage them, and then treat them inhumanely in response to harm. And that we can create restorative practices in the same way that Sharon has said, unhoused folks are banned from shelters. Well, that is making a definitive decision that based on someone's actions, they are not deserving of humanity, of care, of support. And we fundamentally disagree with that. And that is often framed as a very radical position. And to me, it is a very basic position to be in, that all people deserve to be cared for, and that there is a pathway to restoration and healing always. And so I think that's one piece of it. I think the other piece is, sort of big misconceptions. This week we've found ourselves, and I've told the story so many times that I'm sort of don't want to tell it anymore, but we found ourselves in the crosshair of the police union, where our staff has been doxxed. We've been accused of fraud as an organization. And this is a smear campaign because our organization is essentially building the type of power to set agendas where we are demanding that resources stop going into these broken systems and start going into the support systems that our communities need. And that we have to work incredibly hard for that. And they all have political implications on all of us. When one community is politically suppressed, when one community is divested from, the entire community will suffer. Because if one thing is not strong, right, it can collapse the entire building. And so I sort of think, a lot of the misconceptions are politically driven. A lot of the misconceptions of our larger movement are to assume that we are interested in sort of destruction, right? That we are not interested in building. And when we talk about things like abolition, or we talk about things like defunding the police, people see on the other side of that chaos. And what we see on the other side of that is possibility, right? It's room, like, to create something new that actually works, that actually keeps people safe, that actually helps our communities thrive. And people tend to not want to lean into those conversations. They fall back into their comfort. In some cases, that is privileged comfort, right? They fall back into fear and trauma responses, which is understandable. When you have been in a community that has suffered, innovation is scary, right? Innovation is scary. But I think that what we are hoping to do is to actually show that when we build strong communities and have the type of leadership in the city, both governmental and private and everyday citizens are thinking about the collective. When we all start thinking about the collective, our community drastically improves, right? It drastically improves. And we can't just keep driving past and walking past and putting blinders to the issues because they're not individual. When you are looking at an individual, they are a byproduct of so many systems that have interacted with them over time. And if that person is suffering, then it's possible that those systems contributed to that suffering, and it's our responsibility to meet the immediate needs of the person who is suffering, but also to start to interrogate why those systems have so many products that are suffering. And we see that as our work. And I think it's often framed back to us that is false.
Thank you so much for that. And I, as the one thing that I heard you say is that reframing of the who's who's committing acts of violence against whom the most, reframing it from interpersonal to the larger violence that is being done against a group of people as a whole is a really powerful talking point that is really hard to refute.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the point is, if someone, we sort of in this country, right, and because of so many different intersections, race, you know, whatever, we sort of isolate the choice, right? And one decision is a series of decisions, right? When I leave the house is a byproduct of when I decided to wake up, when I decided to get dressed, right? And so we isolate one decision and we sort of erase the backdrop of all the things that have created the conditions where that is possible. And if you have communities that are being starved of resources, their options are limited and they choose things that are then criminalized, right? But if I'm choosing to feed my family and the only way I know how to do that is one way, and then that's criminalized, these are choices that are pushing back on actually getting to the need. What is the driving need of these choices? And I think in a lot of times, the driving need in these choices is survival. It's the desire to thrive. It's the desire to be stable. And so how do we meet the need and not just respond ineffectively to the choice?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, Dr. Punch, kind of the same question. Can you tell us some common misconceptions about the work you do? And kind of like building off of what Kayla said, I mean, the violence within certain communities within our city is something that is constantly used as a, you know, a stick with which certain people can be beat. What are the type of things that you're hearing and that you would like to take the opportunity to push back on and set the record straight?
Yeah, I very much am. Kayla basically answered the question for me. The way that same thought process shows up in healthcare is we criminalize patients before they've even had a chance to be assessed and treated. And so that ends up being, even inside the emergency room, the kinds of discourse and behavior and things that are presented to folks who are literally bleeding and hurting and dying, is they have to weed through this massive burden of assumption and bias that basically says the reason why they're presenting with an injury that's the result of violence is because they were somehow engaged in something that can be ascribed as criminal, therefore is dismissible. Here's where that really becomes a problem, right? Because if you decide, right, that somebody's suffering is a result of a choice they made that they should not have, you can basically ignore what happens after. You make a moral argument to yourself why you don't have to care about what happens to them next. And so here's how that plays out in real time, right? We know that around 2,500 or so people are shot in this city every year. And that we know that 50% of them, locally and nationally, will be discharged from the emergency room after being shot. We know that at our major trauma centers, that's a population that's about 95% Black, 95% male, and almost 70% uninsured. That population therefore has to immediately go home or wherever they can find a place to rest safely to care for their bodies without any further care. But the truth is, the natural history, the physical sequelae of being shot, if it's an injury that does not require immediate surgery, is for the suffering and pain to simply get worse in the 3 to 7 days after the injury because of the body's natural inflammatory response to having a bullet go through your flesh. And so what I have discovered, and this is actually quite honestly not unique to St. Louis, it's a problem across the country, is that there's an entire disease process and body of pain and suffering that has been systematically ignored and basically put upon people to deal with themselves because it occurs in the bodies of Black men. And it's really, really easy in the culture that is the United States, culture that is driven by the desperately trying to maintain the economic realities of child slavery. It is very convenient to ignore Black male body trauma. It's just something we normalize. right? And so my wild supposition is that that untreated trauma is actually the root of a whole lot of future pain and suffering. It is something that is incredibly important. It is something that impacts many, many, many more people than just the body that the bullet goes through. And it's something I think we have basically decided to ignore because it serves the purpose. It serves the purpose beautifully because one of the number one risk factors for being shot is to have been shot. And there's no reason to stop that from happening. I mean, people are throwing up their hands saying, we want to get rid of crime, we want to get rid of crime, but nobody actually wants to invest in equitable public safety, which is what, again, I hear us talking about right now, because that's expensive and requires a reordering of things. Crime reduction is basically, let's just criminalize more people so more people are off the streets so we don't have to really deal with it. But I don't actually care if anybody dies or not. I mean, I'm just keeping it real. This is what I've seen. I literally had people tell me no one would participate with this new project we had, the Bullet Related Injury Clinic, because of the circumstances under which they got shot. There would be some shady circumstance and they wouldn't want to be seen in. They literally had convinced themselves that the reason why people don't follow up in the hospital frequently after having an experience like this is because they're shady. So fighting that and fighting for folks to be seen as humans, worthy of care, worthy of love, is the radical resistance that I have insisted on in the organization and in the work we do. And along with that, a similar body of people that we work with are people who use opioids. It's uber easy to dismiss the pain inside the body of someone who is using opioids, and to simply say that they're drug seeking or they're addicts, and not really see that the underlying root, the opioids are really, really good at treating emotional pain and suffering in about 10% of the population. And so there are some people who experience profound relief from their psychological, mental, spiritual, and emotional pain through opioids. And so I don't see somebody who is doing anything other than trying to survive. But that's another group of folks whose need has been not just stigmatized, but criminalized. So I think, the radical thing in that work is to say that people are worthy, not just of dignity, but they're worthy of care, and that it's actually possible to pursue your well-being as somebody who is actively using drugs. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. It's a wild idea, but we believe in it. And so another project we have at the T is called The Center, and it's a collaboration with the UMSL group. They're working on harm reduction and gathering information to understand why so many, again, Black men are dying from opioid overdoses and what we can do about it. Bullets and opioids are singularly taking out the lives of Black men in our region. And that's why that's two of the things that we focus the most on at the T. And I guess the last thing I would say is that that this doesn't matter. Like, people had told me in the beginning when I started doing Stop the Bleed with people, like, first of all, no one will do it. Second of all, it's not gonna make a difference. But what I found was it's not about tourniquets or gauze. It's about spending time with people and saying, you have power. You don't need just me inside the hospital. Right here, right now, you are ready to help your neighbor. And so that idea in empowering people who don't need to be empowered, they have power. They just need resource and education. Like, that was a radical step. I had so many people tell me that what I was doing was not novel, was not worthy, and would have no impact. But I just kept doing it myself because I knew it was worth investing in.
This makes me think about how often romanticized folks who struggled and are now, mentors, or, everyone loves that story. X person in the community grew up in violence and now they're like turned around to help other folks, right? Like, romantics, the movies have been written about it. Oscars have been won about it. The level of investment that takes to bring someone into feeling empowered we don't invest that level of resources, which is why it feels like an anomaly when we see someone who has survived that to move to a position of being able to thrive, which is why we only want to tell the story of the person who was on the street and now they're stable and have a job, et cetera, right? Because if we focus on that story, then we forget those who don't have the resources to attempt, right? Who don't have the resources to be moved into a position to thrive. I think about this is, last thing I'll say, I think about this quote from Angela Davis when she talks about liberating minds, that prisons, right? And I'll put into this: prisons, jails, facilities do not disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when the human beings contending with them are relegated to cages, right? Or relegated to take care of themselves, or relegated to be put in communities that we don't focus on. They're disappeared. And so you have to think about, when you talk about these issues, who are you not seeing and what would those people need? That's the work that I think all three of our organizations are trying to focus on.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you. One thing I want to point out is we have less than 10 minutes before the end of our event. I see that we've got a couple of comments, but if you want to get a question in really quick, folks, this is the time to do it. And while we're waiting for that, I'm just wondering, and Kayla, you were already responding to something Dr. Punch said, but is there a question or a comment that you would want to make to one of the other panelists, or some just thoughts about their work? This is open to
I mean, one I think is super brilliant, right? And I think at the core of what we want to do is empower people, and the intersections of our work are so important, right? That we tend to think about organizations, we categorize them. These are direct service, these are advocacy. No, we have to be in deep coalition with each other, because when someone is unhoused, right? Because one person doesn't just have one issue. I tell our canvassers this every time. When you knock on the door, we might be knocking to talk about the census or housing, but they're dealing with what it means to be living in this society, which is a myriad of problems, right? And so we need that many solutions, right? And so it may be that we knock on the door to someone who has a loved one who has just got home from being shot. It is important that we have the conversation that we came to have, but we also can say, by virtue of our coalition and our relationship, have you heard of the T, right? Have you heard of this organization? Here's how you plug it up. Here's how you plug in. You should stop by this facility on Del Mar to talk to a trauma surgeon who has decided to be in community where the suffering is. And I think that level, and it matters that Sharon can call and say, hey, the city is not doing enough for the winter that's coming, right? We lost so many people last winter. It was the harshest winter on record. And as an advocacy organization committed to housing justice and investment, we can't narrowly say, well, that's not in our issue. That's not something that we work on. We have to respond to the needs of the people. And so I think what I'm always inspired by is this whole conversation, but also that our organizations, what feels like for the first time in a really long time, are thinking about each other and the ways that we can collaborate to build the net to catch people from falling into complete despair.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're getting snaps. That's wonderful. We did get a question in. Maddie Cronfield has asked, any trainings coming up at the T? And I suppose that kind of leads in, since we've got 5 minutes left, to my final question, which is, how can people get involved with your work? And even if they maybe don't have time to volunteer with your organization, what is something that someone could do tomorrow to aid in the bigger picture of your work? Or to actively help the folks with whom you are engaging day in and day out. So that's for everybody. Maybe Sharon, do you want to go first? What is something that somebody could do tomorrow to help?
Well, this is a question that gets asked all the time. And I think that it's really important to start where you're at. And so you need to start in your own neighborhood or your own route into work, and hand things out the window for the folks that are standing there, whether it be water or sunscreen or Gatorade, things like that. That's a very small way to support people. And we can all do that as a community together, you know. But that's one way that you can help. You could help right now. You could do that. But you can also, if you're interested in, you know, doing street outreach, you know, we do have a training program, but you can always reach out to us through Facebook Messenger and we can talk to you that way.
I just
Or Dr. Punch?
I just put in the chat, we have a series of youth-focused, family-engaged, meaning just adults and kids. We're really a wide range of community, where we're going to be doing Punch Love Boxing, which is the idea that we can work out our trauma sometimes by engaging our body to metabolize and release all that we've taken in, and punching a bag really hard. It does it for me, maybe it does it for other folks. I know it does it for a lot of youth. But then we'll also have Narcan training, Stop the Bleed refreshers with tourniquet application, and some COVID wellness kits. And so all of that's going to be happening. We have 3 events. The first one's going to be July 9th from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. at MLK in Hodemont. We'll be in Koneman Park in August, and we'll be in Fairground Park in September. So you can go to the website. I put it in the answer in the Q&A, and you can go to the website to find out more. Coming out and learning about all of our programs, the BRIC, the Center, the T, it would be a great way to support. And you can also go on the website just to kind of familiarize ourselves. We always need donations, and we also need word of mouth. So, you know, letting people know. A lot of people don't know what we do and how we do it, and we're growing slowly to get more of a presence. So that's some stuff coming up.
Kayla?
Yeah, I put our link in there. One, you know, you don't have to volunteer to get our weekly newsletter. I promise our team puts a lot of effort in there to let you know what's happening in our community on the state level, even nationally, that impacts St. Louis. So just signing up to stay informed, because when you are educated, you are most ready to take action on behalf of your community. So staying alert for that. Obviously, you know, time matters. You can volunteer with our organization. Right now, like I said, we are doing direct outreach to folks who are on the eviction list. We are working on the Defund, Reinvention, Transform campaign. We are getting ready to talk about redistricting in the coming months, because that's about to happen, and that's a really big deal. We're fighting against bad laws in Jefferson City, and there are a lot of them. And so our work, we put out our calls to action each week on our newsletter. So if you sign up for that, you'll receive information about ways that you can plug in ongoing.
Well, thank you so much, folks. We are at time, and I just want to say that I mean, even though this was a mediated experience virtually, I could really get a sense of the passion that each of you have for the work that you're doing, and also a little bit of the anger, which I think is also makes a lot of sense. For our audience, thank you for joining us today, and get involved. We're all coming out of quarantine. We all have a little bit more time on our hands. Let's get involved in there and make our city better. Thank you so much, folks.